Most people think they're tired because they haven't rested enough. So they sleep more. They take breaks. They step away. And yet, the heaviness remains. The body pauses, but the mind doesn't. That's because rest was never the real issue. The problem is something much quieter and much harder to notice. We're taught that rest is the solution to exhaustion. Sleep, vacations, days off. And for the body, this works. Muscles recover. Energy returns. The body understands stillness. But mental exhaustion follows a different rule. You can sleep for 8 hours and wake up just as tired. You can take time off and still feel something pressing inside your chest. Because the mind doesn't get tired from effort alone. It gets tired from unfinished movement, from thoughts that never land, ideas that start but never arrive anywhere, questions that keep looping, looking for an ending that never comes, from conversations you replay because you didn't say what you meant, from decisions delayed because choosing feels heavier than carrying the uncertainty, from emotions that rise and are immediately pushed down, not felt, not processed, just paused. And the mind remembers that pause. You can stop moving and still feel mentally heavy, because stopping isn't the same as completing. Rest doesn't register when something inside you is still mid-sentence. The mind wants closure, a sense of arrival, a feeling that something, somewhere, has finished its arc. Without that, even silence feels loud. That's why distractions don't work for long. They don't resolve anything. They just delay the wait. And when you finally sit still, everything unfinished shows up at once. The thoughts you avoided, the emotions you postponed, the questions you hoped time would answer for you. Mental rest begins, not when you stop doing, but when something inside you settles. When a thought is written out. When a feeling is fully felt. When a decision is finally made. Even if it's imperfect, completion creates rest. Not because everything is solved, but because the mind no longer has to hold the tension open. And until something inside you feels complete, no amount of sleep will feel like enough. Have you noticed this? You finally sit down. The day is over. Nothing is required of you. And suddenly, your thoughts get louder. Not because you're broken, not because you don't know how to rest, but because you finally removed distraction. During the day, stimulation keeps thoughts suspended. Movement keeps the mind busy. Tasks keep attention occupied. Noise keeps emotions quiet. Nothing is resolved. Everything is just kept in motion. Unfinished thoughts hide inside activity. Unfelt emotions stay behind distraction. Questions remain open because there's no space for them to return. At night, that stimulation fades. The noise softens. The demands disappear. And the mind has nowhere else to send what was postponed. So it comes back. The thoughts you didn't complete. The emotions you didn't process. The questions you hoped Tom would answer for you. This isn't the mind resisting rest. It's the mind responding to it. Rest removes noise, but it doesn't resolve tension. And unresolved tension is what drains the mind. That's why lying down can feel heavier than moving. That's why silence can feel louder than sound. That's why the moment you stop doing, the mind starts speaking. The mind stays active during rest, because rest creates space, and space reveals what was left unfinished. Mental exhaustion isn't caused by thinking too much. It's caused by carrying open loops, thoughts without endings, emotions without resolution, questions without closure, until something inside settles. The mind will keep returning to it, not to punish you, but to complete what was never allowed to finish. So when your mind becomes active during rest, it isn't a failure. It's a signal, a reminder that rest alone isn't enough. Something inside you is asking to be seen, felt, or concluded. And when that happens, rest no longer feels empty. It feels complete. An unfinished task creates pressure, but an unfinished thought creates weight. Not obvious weight, quiet weight. The kind you don't notice right away. The kind that doesn't interrupt your day. The kind that follows you into rest. You can sit down, slow your body, close your eyes, and still feel burdened. Because unfinished thoughts don't demand attention. They apply presence. They stay with you. Things like conversations you replay, not because they matter now, but because they never landed. Things like decisions you delayed, not because they were impossible, but because choosing felt heavier than waiting. Things like feelings you postponed, because there wasn't time to feel them fully, or space to sit with them honestly. Things like questions you avoided answering, hoping time would soften them, or make them disappear. But unanswered questions don't disappear. They remain open. And the mind keeps track of what you don't. It remembers every loose end, every unfinished sentence, every moment that didn't reach its conclusion. So even while resting, the mind keeps working, not loudly, not urgently, quietly, persistently. It circles back. It revisits. It replays, not to torture you, not to overwhelm you, but to protect you from forgetting. The mind's job isn't comfort. It's continuity. It wants things to finish. It wants arcs to close. It wants resolution, even imperfect resolution. That's why rest can feel heavy. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because something inside you is still incomplete. Mental fatigue doesn't come from thinking too much. It comes from thinking without landing. Until a thought reaches its end, the mind keeps holding it. And until something inside settles, rest will feel partial. Not because rest failed, but because completion hasn't arrived yet. Many people think they're resting when they're actually escaping. The body stops, but the mind stays occupied. Scrolling, streaming, constant background noise. These don't calm the mind. They pause awareness. They keep attention busy, so nothing else can surface. But when awareness returns, everything resumes exactly where it left off. The same thoughts, the same tension, the same unfinished weight. Escape doesn't remove pressure. It only hides it. That's why distraction feels helpful at first and exhausting later, because nothing inside has changed. True rest isn't the absence of activity. It's the absence of inner pressure. And pressure doesn't dissolve just because you looked away from it. Inner pressure comes from what's unresolved, from thoughts that never reached clarity, from emotions that were postponed, from decisions left open. Distraction keeps these things quiet, but it doesn't release them. So when the noise stops, the pressure returns, not because rest failed, but because escape was mistaken for rest. Real rest doesn't require constant input. It doesn't rely on stimulation. It allows awareness to return without resistance. And when awareness is allowed, the mind can finally process what it's been carrying, not all at once, not perfectly, but enough to settle. Escape delays rest. Completion allows it. And until inner pressure eases, no amount of distraction will feel like peace. Modern life produces endless open loops, messages that are read but never answered, information that is consumed but never reflected on, opinions that are formed quickly without time to settle or mature. The mind is constantly invited in, but rarely given a chance to finish. Every notification opens a thread. Every headline starts a thought. Every update asks for attention. Very few things ask for completion. So the mind keeps carrying more than it was ever meant to close. Not because you're incapable, not because you lack discipline, but because modern life rewards reaction, not resolution. You move from one thing to the next without landing anywhere. And over time, this creates a quiet accumulation. Not stress, not anxiety, just weight. That's why rest can feel shallow. You stop moving, but nothing inside has finished. The body pauses, but the mind is still holding unfinished conversations, half-formed ideas, and unanswered questions. Not because you're doing rest wrong, but because closure has become rare. There is no clear ending to the day, no natural stopping point, no sense that something has been completed. So the mind stays alert, waiting. A tired mind is not always asking for sleep. It's asking for resolution, for thoughts to reach clarity, for questions to be acknowledged, for experiences to be digested instead of stacked. Until that happens, rest will feel thin, not empty, not useless, just incomplete, because the mind doesn't relax. When everything stops, it relaxes. When something finally closes, the mind rests. When something finishes, not when everything stops, not when everything disappears. When something completes, a thought that reaches clarity, an emotion that is fully felt, instead of interrupted or postponed, a question that is answered or consciously released. The mind doesn't need perfection. It doesn't need every problem solved. It needs movement to land. This is where rest actually begins, not by fixing everything, but by allowing something to reach its end. Even one thing, one clear thought, can ease the weight of many unclear ones. One fully felt emotion can quiet dozens that were waiting. One honest decision, even an imperfect one, can release more pressure than endless consideration. That's why clarity feels light, because nothing is being held open. Nothing is looping. Nothing is asking for attention. And that's why confusion feels exhausting. Not because it's dramatic, but because it requires constant holding. The mind stays active when it has to keep track. It settles when it can let go. So the mind isn't asking for silence. It isn't asking for distraction. It isn't even asking for rest. It's asking for completion, something to finish, something to close. Because when one thing completes, the mind finally has permission to soften. And in that softening, rest naturally follows. If rest doesn't work, and escape doesn't work, then something else must be missing, because the mind keeps returning to the same feeling. Not tiredness, not stress, but incompleteness. Why does the mind never feel done? Why does there always seem to be something left hanging inside? A thought without an ending, an emotion without resolution, a question that was never allowed to settle. These aren't small things. They shape how rest feels. They shape how silence feels. They shape how the mind behaves. When everything finally stops, this question matters more than it seems, because the mind doesn't rest just because activity ends. It rests when something concludes, and until the mind understands what finished actually feels like, rest will always feel partial. Sleep will feel shallow. Breaks will feel unsatisfying. Silence will feel unfinished. Not because rest is broken, but because completion is missing. In the next episode, we'll explore what it means for the mind to truly finish something. Not perfectly, not dramatically, but enough to finally feel done. Mental exhaustion is not weakness, it's accumulation. Thoughts carried too long, emotions left unfinished, questions kept open. And relief doesn't begin with effort. It begins with understanding. This was episode 3 of the Tired Mind series. Next, we'll explore why the mind never feels complete and what keeps it open. Until then, slow the mind. Still mind. A quiet place to think clearly.